We're your host, Richard Britton, and I'm Alan Kirk.
Today we're discussing another word of the week, and our hope is that you'll remember the word and find it applicable to your daily life.
Well, this week's word, Richard, is sin.
Sin.
And that's kind of a hard word to go over because we all do it, right?
Yes, we do. For all have sinned.
Even the most sanctified and religious Christian still sins. We can't help it. It's just our human nature. It's the fallen world that we live in. But today, let's just talk about sin for just a minute. And of course, I'm going to give you the Merriam-Webster definition here of what sin is, and then kind of the secular view that I took from different research sites that I went to. But Merriam-Webster defines sin as an offense against a religious or moral law, which I found interesting in the Merriam-Webster dictionary that they would use that. And then an action that is or is felt to be highly reprehensible. It's a sin, like example, to waste food. Or a sin to drink too much, that we overindulge. And often serious shortcoming or a fault is a sin, according to Merriam-Webster. It's also, and here again, I'm surprised they put this in there, transgression of the law of God.
Oh.
Okay.
Yes.
And a violated state of human nature in which the self is estranged from God. So it's kind of like a separation between us and God. Well, that really makes sense. So Merriam-Webster kind of hit it on, I don't know if the
theologically they got it, didn't they?
Well, yeah, but they also had to add that secular dig in there as well, too. So let's talk about more on the meaning of sin in a secular sense.
All right.
Secular usage that can be weighed based on one's opinion and graded according to the culture in which we live. So let me kind of expound on that. Sin does, however, have weakened non-religious meanings. It's an action that is or is felt to be highly reprehensible. So, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, some of the worst things that we can think up in our mind, in our culture today, would be highly reprehensible. Well, our culture sees that as a sin. Meaning it is still a weighty word, reprehensible, but it refers to the action of a kind that are likely to be strongly condemned. Well, now I wonder what that strongly condemned. Is that by God's law or by man's law?
You brought up a really good point. Whose standard are we going to go by? Who determines what a sin is?
Exactly. So keep that in mind. That's very good. So far weaker is it's an often serious shortcoming. So we minimize now sin, meaning which can jokingly apply to a harmless act like eating one dessert too many, or can be paired with another word to refer to a failing of one kind or another, as in literally grammatically sin. So we can tell a little white lie. Well, is that a sin? Well, it's just a little white lie. It's no big deal. But if we have a Texas Chainsaw Massacre where we're killing dozens of well, God doesn't look at it like that, which we're going to get into in a minute. But I want to keep going through this secular thought here.
This is good. Yeah.
Because this is how our culture views. We grade it out. So the word sinful, according to this Merriam-Webster and the research I've done, the word sinful, although it is most often found used in reference to behavior that is in some way, and they use the word wicked, okay, may also be found denoting activities which are quite enjoyable, although still possibly guilt-inducing. Such as eating a sinful dessert. So they're saying now sinful can be surrounded by, we can define it by activities which are enjoyable. So it could be sex or drinking or eating, something that would be overindulging.
Okay.
All right, from a secular standpoint, sin is also used in a fair number of compound nouns, some of which allow shades of sinfulness. Example, venial sin is much less serious than a mortal sin.
All right.
Now, I'm asking Debbie the other day on the couch, we're looking at TV, and I'm saying, Debbie, why is it we can sit here and we can look at people murdering and stealing like in the cop shows?
Yes.
Or a war movie.
Oh, yeah.
Or, just everyday, movies that we just take for granted of killing and lying and stealing and sinning, and we know that they're sinning, but yet, and we accept it and it's fine and it's entertaining, but yet when we get a commercial for HIV, and now, we're getting to the point where we have two gay men kissing or loving on each other. And, we look at that, and her and I are like changing the channel, with the flipper real quick because it's like disgusting to us. Well, that's what we were just talking about. We've just graded out based on the cultural belief that we feel that one is reprehensible over another. Now, we're going to talk about how God sees it in just a minute.
All right.
But we're sitting there and I'm going, why do we do that? Because, if we're accepting all the cheating and stealing and murder and lying and all that stuff, why is it the homosexuality that we're seeing on the commercial any more reprehensible than that? And she's like, well, we're conditioned.
Yes.
We've watched violence. When I was growing up, I watched cartoons with, the Three Stooges is a perfect example.
That's a violent show, some cases, yeah.
And hitting and we watch war movies. Well, we've become conditioned to it.
Yeah.
So let me go on with this idea of venial and mortal sin. If you find yourself in need of a word with which to describe behavior or inclinations that are in some way questionable, but feel that sin is too strong a word, now we're backtracking as a society. The English language has a wealth of options available. Now listen to this is on a website defining what sin is. That Latin word peccare, to sin, has given rise to a number of English words that deal with sin, but which have less fire and brimstone in their meaning. We have peccadillo, a slight offense, and pickable, which may mean either liable to sin or susceptible to temptation, and peccant, violating a principle or rule as a taste of propriety. Okay. So our society our culture has graded out sin. There's sin that's acceptable, that's less.
Yes.
And then there's reprehensible or mortal sin, which is not acceptable in society. I remember the tale of a king that walked out and he had complete control over his kingdom. And he walked out completely naked in the crowd.
Yes.
And he didn't expect anybody to say anything because he set the standard.
Yes, he's the king, yeah.
And someone in the crowd pointed out and whispered to somebody else, hey, he's naked. And then that person turned to the next person. Well, eventually, the whole crowd recognized his nakedness, and he saw the shame in it.
I see, yes.
Okay? But he, in his mind, since he was the ruler, set the standard for the culture that he was going to go out naked in front of everybody, and it was fine. It wasn't reprehensible. So the point in the story is, if you haven't already gotten it, the crowd, the culture determines the standard based on, now this is from a secular view,
Okay.
not from a religious view.
Okay.
We're going to get there.
All right.
But the crowd determines the standard. And if we are willing to go along with
Yes.
the standard that the king or the president or the society has deemed for us as acceptable, then we only have us to blame for accepting it.
Yes.
Now, if we look at it in a religious context, before we even get there, let me say one more thing.
Okay.
Because I feel like I'm going to get that righteousness here in just a moment. But, we have a society today. We've always sinned in our society. Our culture has always defined what is acceptable and not acceptable. And the further we get from a religious foundation, the closer we get to a cultural standard.
Yes, there's a drift in that direction.
Correct. Because when you don't have a biblical worldview standard, it's always going to lean back towards a cultural standard. And because that applies to us as individuals. When we don't have Christ-centered belief in our everyday life, we
Yes.
tend to take the reins and control what we feel is right and wrong.
Yes.
And so our society, in a cultural way, has gone away from a biblical standard to a cultural standard. Well, how can I, we determine sin for ourselves? That doesn't sound right. I mean, look at our law system today. I mean, we cannot legislate. We cannot legislate morality and character.
No.
We cannot legislate what sin is. Now, we did have the Ten Commandments to legislate the basics of how a society is supposed to act and run in order to be right with God.
Mm-hmm.
And we lived on those standards for years and years and years, but now we're changing the law and changing the standards, and look at the shape and the condition. The only reason why, what I have to compare this to is the Roman society.
Okay.
And they were around for 500-600 years.
Oh, I'm probably, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think they were around
Okay.
for 500-600 years.
Okay.
And the degradation of their culture, their society that they had built, they built a wonderful society with buildings and technology and their people they entertained, but somewhere along the way, the Roman culture started degrading. They started going towards that culture defining what sin was.
Yes.
And, you had senators who had, boys that performed sexual acts for them. And, there was homosexuality and, all kind of lewdness going on in their society. And that is what caused the Roman Empire to eventually fall because of the leader, between Nero and some of the Caligula and some of the other leaders in the Roman Empire. Our culture is not built on what we can build in buildings. Our culture is built on the people that live within it, and that's what determines. So, like the king that was naked, if we don't have the people following, and whispering, hey, that king is naked, he's doing wrong, we need to do right. If we don't do that as a society, then we can look forward to a degraded society in the long run.
Yes.
But that starts one person at a time. Somebody's got to whisper to the next person that whispers to the next person.
Yeah.
So sin is really, it's like a double-edged sword. We have society or our culture built on what we define as sin, and all of our laws and regulations are built. I don't think you can have one without the other. So what do we use now? Okay, here
Okay.
it goes.
All right.
Religious. What do we use now as our foundation for our culture? What should we be using?
What should we be using? Well, it would really benefit us to go back to the words of our Creator in the Bible, since He's created us, and He's been kind enough to prescribe for us how to live.
Right.
And they're given in the Ten Commandments. He's basically simple things like stealing. Let's just take one and talk about it.
Right.
Would you like for me to steal your car?
Right.
You know, when it's being carried out on you, the victim, it's not good at all.
Well, and
You know?
here's the difference. When you're talking about stealing,
Yeah.
where's the moral compass for that? Do we find it in the law, or do
Yes.
we find it in morality, which God gives us?
I see.
And see, the Jewish people struggled with that for
Yes.
generations. They had God's law in Leviticus and
Yes.
Numbers, and of course they wanted a king. You can go into 1st and 2nd Kings. And they tried to develop their culture based on their laws. And what did Jesus say? I'm not just here for the law to fulfill. I'm here to fulfill it and extend it even further.
Yes.
So it's, God is always telling us, we cannot, here again I go back to this, we cannot legislate character and morality.
No.
People have to have an inward character morality, and
Yes.
that's only found in the Word of God, because that's our standard. People
Yes.
have to have a standard.
Yes.
People's laws change.
Oh, yes. They change with the wind.
God's law has never changed. It's been the same for thousands of years. The
Yes.
Jewish people never got that.
There's a fixed standard that's been delivered to us by God, but none of us have ever lived up to it.
Right.
We've never. When you study sin as the Bible defines it,
Right.
it's a missing of the mark. It's a falling short.
Yeah.
And there's something that comes up here. Sin is a principle or a source of action or an inward element, something inside us that produces these actions.
Right.
And it's contrary to God's will.
Right.
It's defiant, and
Right.
it's going to lead. There's a consequence of sin. The Bible points out the wages of sin is death.
Right.
So,
Well, it shows up in Genesis.
and
That was the very first sin. That's why we have the curse of God
Yes.
on the generations after Adam and Eve, is due to their
Yeah.
sin. And yes, He did create us that way.
Yeah.
I'm not prescribing that just because God created us with sin, well, then it's normal. We should just go ahead. No. He created us with free will to make a choice.
Yes.
And that choice allows us to either give in to our sin and prescribe to it, or to listen to what God has ordained in His will for us. Even Adam and Eve, He wanted to walk in the cool of the day with them for the rest of their lives. He wanted to have that relationship with them.
Yeah.
But they chose, even though He made them that way, they chose, they had the decision to make. And that's what, for thousands of years, the word sin has been in use well over 1,000 years,
Oh, yeah.
Current form comes from the Middle Eastern language sin, S-I-N-N-E,
Oh.
which is itself from the Old English sin, S-Y-N. The original meaning of sin were largely concerned with religious matters and offense against religious or moral law, which we talked about in our definition. It's a transgression of the law of God, a defective state of human nature, like the sin nature that we're in which the self is estranged from God. So sin in the garden originally separated us from the Lord, because He's a righteous God. He's the standard. He's the perfection. He's what's perfect. Now, we're not perfect, and none of us can say that we're perfect, but we strive to perfection. And I know in the secular world, people look at Christians as hypocritical, and rightfully so. But we also need to convey that, it's not just, non-saved people or secular people, whatever you want to call it, Christian, non-Christian, but we all sin. We all fall short of the mark that you talked about.
Yeah.
And so when we fall short of the mark, God always gives us the standard, the law by which to follow Him, to be in His will, if we will just do it and make the choice.
Yeah.
Instead of bogging our mind down with what man's law is. Man's law keeps us, supposed to keep us, that better word, supposed to keep us morally compassed, develop our character, keep us from doing the reprehensible acts of society. But God's law gives us the morality and character to fulfill man's law.
He does. He gives you the if you've received Christ, your desires will change.
Yeah. We shouldn't allow our leadership to define who we are. We should allow God to define who we are. And even if we don't believe in God, moral character and standards are biblical worldview. There's right and wrong.
Yes.
In any culture. And so we should, instead of our leadership being wishy-washy back and forth, because we elect a Democrat or we elect a Republican or an independent, that shouldn't define what our culture is. It should be the person that we're putting in office should define, like, what is their Judeo-Christian belief? What is their moral fiber? It's not what they can do for us. It's what can they do for our culture, our society. And, if we don't, as a people, start pointing out the sinful nature in our leadership, how can we expect our culture to change?
That's a very good point. If we're allowing the culture to dictate our behavior or our standards for us,
yes, exactly.
if they determine this is right and this is wrong, well, someone needs to have the final say.
Right.
I was a sinner, a devout sinner, for many, many years. And then at age 42, I came across the Word of God. And
the absolute truth.
The absolute truth.
Yeah.
And when I looked into this, I became convicted about the way I was living.
Right.
And I saw, okay, living according to God's way would be infinitely better than my way.
And we saw how we were sinning against God.
I saw it, yes. And,
our standards changed.
That's really what happened.
Yeah.
Internally, my whole set of standards, I adopted God's standards. I determined His way is far better than mine.
Yeah.
And He's very gracious. He was offering us an opportunity to come along and do things His way.
Right.
Well, if you think this through, if we go with the culture, they can't grant us eternal life. God can.
Right.
If we go with God, His ways, He actually requires perfection.
Yeah.
We couldn't do that.
No.
So
but He's given us a helper to try to attain to it.
Yes.
And that's where, I want folks to remember that, we are imperfect followers of Christ who are trying to attain a closer relationship with the truth, who we know to be the truth.
Yes.
That's all we are. We're not any better than anybody else.
No.
We're not we're all the same. The only difference is I believe if we're a true believer and a true follower of Jesus Christ, we're putting forth the effort to improve ourselves and be better and be the light for other folks to follow. And so sinning now becomes a known thing, a different, like we were talking about, a different standard. Our standards change. There's things that we accept and things that we don't accept. And this is a point where I might get a little too righteous, but you know, God looks at sin the same. It doesn't matter if it's a little white lie or if it's homosexuality or if it's murder. Everything that we lay before the Lord's feet is filthy rags.
That's right.
Even what I lay before, it's not good enough for the Lord. But I'm trying to attain a different standard now in my life. And I want to reflect that standard so that I'm whispering to other people, hey, this is the truth. You're looking at a naked king. You're not looking at the true standard. You're not looking at the truth. And so it becomes, I'm not condemning and judging others. I'm trying to show others there's a better way.
Yes.
There's hope.
Let's just think about our standards of right and wrong. Let's just say, take something like adultery. If the culture at large practices adultery, then the homes, the families are going to be ruined. There'll be grief and heartbreak, and children will be born that wouldn't have been born otherwise. And there's so many things that it affects. Well, if we just go with God's way, let's be faithful to our spouses and raise our children. The families will be strong and healthy. And I mean, it makes sense if you just stop and think about it. And all those commandments that He's given us, stealing or lying, or if we just look at that, well, that's actually a pretty good way to live. If everybody practiced those,
that's the point. If everyone, and I'm going to bring this back to Genesis with Adam and Eve.
All right.
Now, the family they had was Adam, Eve, and God. And of course, we know that was Jesus walking in the cool of the day with them. That was the family unit. And what came in between in the family unit? What became in between them, between God and Adam and Eve?
Well, the serpent, is that
the serpent? That's what I'm alluding to.
Yes.
They, Adam and Eve, allowed him to come in between.
He influenced their thinking.
And so, like today, influencing our thinking in today's society as a family, like you were just talking about, is what my wife would call the boob tube. You know, that we listen to the TV or we listen to the radio, or we allow, and we do this to ourselves. Everybody, whether we're Christian or whether we're not, we do this to ourselves. We allow the devil. We allow the serpent to come into our lives and allow it to happen. I do.
I do too.
And we don't think about it, and it just happens, and we're constantly fighting this battle like Paul fought.
We've been bewitched by the media that's been produced in Hollywood. I saw